Hello, this is James Faulkner from Red Hat Technical Product Marketing, and today I'm going to show you how to deploy JBoss Enterprise Application Platform, or EAP, on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or RHEL, to Azure through the new Azure Marketplace offer. With this offer, EAP can be deployed as a standalone server based on Azure VMs, a clustered set of services also on VMs, or an auto-scaled and clustered service based on Azure Virtual Machine Scale Sets, or VMSS. This provides a lot of flexibility and control to set up EAP and integrate it into your existing Azure environments. You also have pay-as-you-go and bring your own subscription options for RHEL, while EAP requires an EAP subscription from Red Hat. For the BYOS options, your Red Hat products must also be enabled through Red Hat Cloud Access. Let's get started. So here we are on the Microsoft Azure portal, and the first step is to install EAP itself. So to do that, I'll click Create a Resource, and I'll search the marketplace for EAP on RHEL, and it should be the first one here. I'll click on it, and that takes me to the overview page for the offer with some information and some screenshots. I'll just go ahead and click Get It Now. Now here I can choose which plan I want. You'll remember we talked about having standalone VMSS and clustered options. I'll just go with the BYOS standalone for now, and I'll click Continue. Now we step through a few pages here and enter some information. So the first thing I'll do is create a new resource group. I'll call it EAP Demo, and I'll put it in the East US region. Give it a clever name of my VM name for the VM. The RHEL admin here is RHEL admin. And I'll use a super secret password, which I will copy and paste into the fields here. And the next screen is for VM. You can choose VM sizes. You can also alter the network configuration. Turn boot diagnostics on or off. I'll leave that on for now just in case. And then we'll go to the EAP settings. Here we can create an EAP admin user called EAP admin, give him a password, and then I type in my Red Hat or my Red Hat subscription manager along with the password. And then finally, the Red Hat Subscription Manager pool ID with the EAP and, in this case, RHEL entitlements as well. I'll copy and paste that in from my Red Hat account. And I'll click Next. Now on the final screen, it just gives me the information I typed in, and I can confirm it. And I'll just go ahead and click Create. We'll wait for that to finish. It'll take 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, my deployment is complete. I'll go ahead and go to the resource group. Now, by default, these EAP instances are not exposed to the internet. Since I'm using the standalone mode, I can simply add a public IP address and add a couple of rules to the network security group to expose that to the internet, so we can go ahead and test that. So I will do that now. Now notice I've added 2 ports here, 8080 for the default web port for EAP and 9990 for the management port, which we'll be using in a moment. And then I'll also associate this new public IP address with my virtual machine, the network interface on the virtual machine. Okay, with my EAP server now exposed, I should be able to take this name and copy it into my URL and get my EAP welcome page up and running. So it looks like it appears to be up and running. You can also click on the administration console. I'll log in with the EAP admin, which is the same user I specified when I was deploying. And I can get to my EAP admin console as well. So the next step is to install a database for use by the application that will be deploying to EAP. And for that, I'm going to use Microsoft SQL Server built on and optimized for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which is also available through the marketplace. So just go over here, type in SQL on RHEL, and you'll find a number of different flavors of SQL Server. I've already installed it using the default values into a separate resource group. I'm just going to now go ahead and create the database inside of the SQL Server instance for use by my application. And for that, I'll use the Cloud Shell. We'll connect using the SQL command, specifying the IP address and username, and give it a password, same one I set up. And now I can go ahead and create my database. So I'll just create database. I'll call it Cool Store since that's the name of the application. It's a retail store application that you'll see in a moment. So with my database created, I can now proceed to install and deploy the application onto EAP. So like any Jakarta EE application that wants to talk to a database, it does so and needs a data source defined in the application server. That data source in turn talks through a database driver ultimately to the database itself. So the first step here is to install a database driver. So installing a database driver on the EAP management console is a relatively simple affair. You can actually deploy them in the same way that you deploy applications. So if I click the Deployments tab and click New Deployment, Add a Deployment, I can then simply drag and drop the jar file from the vendor, in this case Microsoft, for the SQL Server, and click Next, and I'll give it a simplified name of just MS SQL, and then we should be good to go here. Click Finish, and it will automatically recognize it as a JDBC driver and install it appropriately for use by data sources. So the final step before we can deploy our application is to create that data source, which ultimately links with the database driver to the database itself. So to do that, we can also use the EAP management console. So head over to the Configuration tab, click Subsystems, Data Sources and Drivers. I'll first show you the JDBC driver that we've already installed for Microsoft here. There's also an in-memory H2 database driver that comes out of the box with EAP. In the data source, there's an example one, but we want a new one, or we'll need a new one for our application. So I'll click Add Data Source, and EAP ships with a number of helpful templates for different databases, including SQL Server. So I'll choose that one, click Next. I'll give it a name of CoolStore DS or Data Source. I'll give it a super secret Jindy name. Oops, not that one. This one here. And click Next. And then the database driver I'll need to select is the MS SQL one that I installed here. The driver module name and class name is correct, and then we'll proceed to the connection. So the connection string here, as you can see, we provide a default one, which will work, but I need to change the values from localhost to my IP address of my SQL Server. So I'll head back over to the Azure portal and get the IP address of my SQL Server, which is under the SQL Server IP, which is here. I'll copy that. I will paste that in place of localhost, and then the database name that I created earlier is CoolStore. Username is SA, password is the one I used when setting it up. So type that in. We're not using security domains in this application. We'll just use your username and password. And click Next. And here we are able to test the connection to make sure it's valid. I'll click Test. Test connection is successful, so now I have my data source and I'm ready to rock with my application. All right, the final step here is to deploy the application itself, and in the EAP management console we can also do that. Just like I deployed the database driver earlier, I can also deploy applications. So for example, let's say upload deployment, and I'll drag my pre-created Java Jakarta EE application into the same box, click Next, leave it called root.war. This will put it into the root application context, so I won't have to type a giant URL to get to it. And it should take a couple seconds here to upload and then start executing, and we'll be able to access our application. Okay, our application is deployed. I can view the deployment in the management console, but I can also simply go up here, change the URL here just to port 8080, which is the default. We should have our running application up if I reload this page. And indeed, our application is up and running. You can see the products we offer, the inventory information, all of this coming out of the SQL Server database. In fact, we can go take a look at the SQL Server database in Visual Studio Code with the handy extension for SQL Server. I've already connected to it. I had no tables earlier. If I refresh this, I should now see the tables in my database corresponding to my application. I have the inventory, I have orders, I have product catalog. If we take a look at the product catalog, we'll look at the top 10, and this should correspond to the values we see in the actual store, and indeed it does. Same values from this store here. So just to recap what we did, we deployed JBoss EAP onto Azure through the Azure Marketplace, then connected it to SQL Server running on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and finally deployed an application, a retail application, to JBoss EAP backed by that database. I hope you enjoyed it.